come to that first point there, I just want to say that, when we learn to set boundaries for ourselves, boundaries actually give us freedom. And boundaries actually allow us to fully show up because we're clear on what feels right for us. And I'll say more about that as we go along. And when we talk about boundaries, it's helpful to know, well, what do we mean by a boundary? And boundaries are when we set limits on what we feel is acceptable or unacceptable behavior for us. So boundaries can be around our relationships, it can be around our emotions, our time, our space, what we're comfortable actually hearing from people. Sometimes people might use language or talk about something in a certain way that we find quite deflating, and we would appreciate if that wasn't said around us. So boundaries includes all of this. And why boundaries become so integral to our lives is that they can really help to improve our relationships, and they really protect our well-being and the well-being of others. And how do they actually improve our lives? If we have boundaries, how do they actually help with this? Well, when we have a good sense of, what feels right for us, what's acceptable for us, that promotes a healthy self-concept. And again, this can help to improve our relationships. And when we can respect our own boundaries, it's a lot easier to respect other people's boundaries. And here's the other thing I was going to say is that, when we feel that someone's crossed our boundaries, that can really close us down. So the better we get at recognizing our own boundaries, the better we get at responding to when we feel they're being crossed. And this is really common. Sometimes we can feel hesitant to create a boundary or put a boundary in place. And there's a number of reasons for this. Oftentimes we might be that person that's a bit of a people pleaser. And so we want to say yes to everybody. We want to be that person that always helps out. And we want to be liked. So we often find ourselves allowing our boundaries to be crossed or not saying something because we don't want to upset anybody or we don't want to hurt anybody. A lot of the time, though, we might find ourselves wanting to set a boundary, but we just don't know how to do it. We just feel uncomfortable because we don't know the best way of going about it. That's right. When we come to talk about steps for that, I hope that can be helpful to you. Whoops. There are signs, though, that if we're paying attention, there can be signs that are telling us that we might need to set some boundaries. So, for example, we might be helping out a lot. We might be contributing to something a lot, and we really feel taken for granted. Or we continue to put up with behavior that we find so unacceptable. Or we get far too involved in other people's problems. And this is a real common one and a real telltale sign that we might need to set a boundary. And that is, that scenario where you say yes to something and then afterwards you go, oh my gosh, why did I do that? And sometimes we've said yes to something because we may have felt pressure, or we may have felt guilty, or we wanted to be that nice person and help out. And there might just be a feeling inside you that you're allowing certain things to occur that are uncomfortable for you, and you just know that you're not being true to yourself. So this is what boundaries are, and this is how they can improve our lives. And these can be some signs that you might need to set some boundaries. So what I want to do now is I'd like to go into talking about steps that we can take to create boundaries, but I want to stop for a moment. And I just want to check in with you. to see if there's any comments or questions. And again, if you're in the lounge, don't hesitate to put anything in the chat.
Bernadette, question.
Yes.
How do I come to know about other people's boundaries? I'm definitely aware of my own. I'm sure you're going to talk about that because, today so many things are politically incorrect to say about, things that we said earlier, now a little more aware, conscious, but we don't know where the other person is coming from. So how do we know other people's boundaries? Did you be talking about that?
In actual fact, I wasn't going to talk about that so much. I was going to talk about setting boundaries for ourselves. However, I think you've raised such a good point that I will make a comment around that because that's just a brilliant question. The first thing is sometimes we don't know that we might be breaking someone's boundaries. Sometimes we don't know because the person doesn't say anything. Like I might, I could do something very innocent like this. Like, let's say someone's helped me with something, or I'm at work and I put my hand on the person's shoulder and I say, thank you so much. And that made them feel really uncomfortable that I did that, but they don't say anything. So what I might want to be aware of is I might catch myself and think, you know what, Bernadette, I know you were just trying to be friendly there, but maybe you should rethink that given the current climate we're in. So sometimes we don't know, and we hope that someone will say something to us. Other times we might pick it up in the current culture. So we read things in the newspaper, or we hear, or we see things on shows, or friends tell us, or groups of people let us know that they don't want to be referred to in a certain way. They want to be referred to in this way. And, here's what I've done. And it doesn't mean that I always get it right. Sometimes I've said something and then I've caught myself. And what I'll do is I'll say, oh, you know what? I'm not sure if that sits well with you. I'm really sorry. Did what I say there offend you? And sometimes that can be a way of learning. Someone might say to me, well, Bernadette, I'd really appreciate it if you would do this next time, not that. So I think we learn about people's boundaries by sometimes listening to, like, if I have a hesitation around saying something, that might be a cue that I'm hesitating because I'm not sure how it's going to land. Or I'm getting a sense that the person I'm with, I could be going into delicate territory. So I always think that there's some standards. Like when we talk about politics, or when we talk about certain spirituality or religion, or if we we talk about if people are entering a conversation and it has to do around sensitive topics that we know can be quite sensitive, then I just really hold back and I don't say anything. I feel the ground out, or